In this short video, I'd like to share a few reflections on M.R. Carey's novel The Girl with All the Gifts, which was first published in 2014, and its prequel called The Boy on the Bridge, which was published in 2017. And I'd like to explain how these two texts borrow from the conventions of zombie fiction and also from the generic conventions of so-called outbreak narratives, that is, literary fictions and films which describe a global pandemic. And the fact that the two books bring these different genres together makes them very relevant, more both to the wider topic of sort of narratives of catastrophe, and also to our own cultural and political present. And I will say a few words also about the experience of isolation and our sort of changing sense of space and during the COVID-19 health crisis, and particularly in relation to lockdown rules. So let me first say something about The Girl with All the Gifts and The Boy on the Bridge. M.R. Carey is a novelist and also a graphic novelist, and The Girl with All of the Gifts was his greatest success to date. There's also an adaptation for the screen. It's the story of a girl, Melanie, who grows up in a prison-like community where she's constantly in the company of other children who are treated very, very badly by military guards, and it has these two figures who she primarily interacts with, these two adults. One is a psychologist, Helen Justineau, and the other one is a military officer, Sergeant Eddie Parks. In addition, there's also the scientist, Caroline Caldwell, who's the chief scientific officer for the whole research station. The novel begins without any clear description of Melanie's identity, and it's narrated from Melanie's point of view. But spoiler alert, what we find out after a few chapters, in a twist that rather resembles the twist in, for those of you who read the novel, in Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro, or also in the I Am Legend. So in a similar kind of sort of twist, we discover that Melanie is actually a non-human, in some ways zombie-like creature. Melanie hears about creatures which are out there outside the walls of the research station called the Hungries, and these Hungries are very recognizably like the zombies of sort of post-Romero popular culture. So they behave like aggressive automata. They don't have any consciousness, but they have this superhuman physical strength and this ability to follow humans, to track humans, and above all, they feed on human flesh. So there are the Hungries in this near future world. There are the scientists in the research station. There are other non-organized human communities, sort of marauding gangs called the Junkers, and sort of Mad Max style post-apocalyptic communities. There is a larger city called Beacon, which is described as a sort of more or less totalitarian, militaristic society. And then there is Melanie and the other children who do not fit into any of these categories. So they're very interesting for our sort of ongoing question as to who is depicted as monstrous in these narratives, and what these different imaginary forms of monstrosity reveal about our sense of identity and our projection of alterity. So Melanie finally escapes from the station and then goes through a whole series of adventures which are rather interesting and also very much written in the kind of sort of gripping style of genre fiction. Why is this relevant to our theme? Why are we reading such a book in the context of our course? I'd like to first of all say that zombie fiction and also narratives of epidemiological catastrophe are very relevant to what we've discussed already, the sort of phenomena of global connectivity. As a narrative, they are particularly attentive to the fatal interconnectedness of global networks of circulation. So when we have a circulation of goods, we also potentially have a circulation of pathogens, and in this case, the zombie, or rather that which triggers this state of sort of zombie-like behavior, which is a fungus, a fungal infection. This fungal infection travels through the same circuits of global exchange as the as those which underlie sort of global networks of market exchange, for example. So, and this is something that Roger Luckhurst gets to when he says that narratives of etymological catastrophe and zombie fictions are the most literal representation of globalized late capitalism that our system of genre media has actually produced. But I'd also like to say something about the experience of space in these novels. What will strike you when you read them, particularly when you read The Boy on the Bridge, which is in some respects a less original novel. It's more derivative. It's set in the same fictional universe as The Girl with All the Gifts, but it makes a point which The Girl with All the Gifts also makes, and it makes that point even more strongly. And the point that they both make is that this post-apocalyptic world is not a world of kind of sort of freedom from constraints. So we saw in some of the other texts that we looked at together, we saw that catastrophe and its aftermath are imagined as a sort of return to a kind of sort of state of pre-civilized freedom, kind of sort of very often associated with an idea of heroic masculinity, free of any social constraints, and also free to roam space. This is not the case here. What we have instead is, at least for the human characters, not for the Hungries, is this sense of confinement in this extremely claustrophobic spaces. The humans have to shield in order to protect themselves both from the pathogen, from the fungal infection, and of course from attacks by the marauding gangs, by the Junkers, and especially from attacks by the Hungries. So all these novels are set in these very claustrophobic spaces, in prison-like laboratories or actual cells, or in these traveling research stations, labs on wheels, which are actually also, in the case of the Boy on the Bridge, which are also extremely claustrophobic. So what the novels achieve at this level is, I would say, satirical subversion of the idea of post-apocalypse as a kind of sort of expression of profound freedom, and rather what they achieve, in fact, is this sense of a discrepancy between our official discourse and in also certain nationalistic rhetoric and the actual constraints in this situation of emergency. I'm just going to read you a very, very short passage which conveys this rather well, and it comes from The Boy on the Bridge, and it's a description of the traveling research station called the Rosalind Franklin, which is sent from this totalitarian city-state of Beacon out to explore the wastelands which are inhabited only by Junkers and Hungries. And they say, and I read this to you now, finally, after 100 false starts, the Rosalind Franklin begins her northward journey from Beacon on the south coast of England all the way to the wilds of the Scottish Highlands. There aren't many who think she'll make it that far, but they wave her off with bands and garlands all the same. They cheer the bare possibility. And what we have here, I would argue, is a sort of very dramatic sense of a shrinking world, of a kind of sort of disappearing possibilities. The idea of, for M.R. Carey, when he writes this in 2017, the idea of the journey from the south coast of England all the way to the Scottish Highlands being a kind of, adventurous, impossible journey, that idea was very funny. It's sort of meant as a satire. But what we now experience, I think, interestingly, when we read this, is that our own awareness of space and spatial distance is changing as a result of the COVID-19 crisis and as a result of lockdown, and we are perhaps arguably now more sympathetic to this experience of claustrophobic space and of confinement, or in any case, even if we're not sympathetic, we recognize some of our own concerns and some of our own fears in this text.